Jack had always been the kind of man who marched to his own beat. Nestled on the edge of Willow Creek Estates, his sprawling acre of untamed land was a stark contrast to the manicured lawns and white picket fences of the neighboring homes. There, a centerpiece of his property was Bucky, a towering bison whose thick brown coat shimmered in the afternoon sun and whose calm, intelligent eyes held a wild spirit no one dared tame. For years the neighbors had whispered and gossiped about Jack and his unusual pet. Some admired his rugged independence. Others eyed him with suspicion, quietly wishing the HOA would force him to conform. But Jack never cared. He'd built his life around the bond he shared with Bucky, a connection that went deeper than most could understand. One crisp morning, as Jack sat on his porch, sipping strong coffee, a pristine white envelope lay waiting in the mailbox. It was the kind of envelope you never want to see. Crisp, official, stamped with the HOA's seal. His fingers trembled slightly as he tore it open. The letter inside was brief, but its tone was chilling. Dear Mr. Harris, the board has unanimously decided that your bison must be contained within a secure enclosure by the end of the month. This measure is necessary to ensure the safety and harmony of our community. Failure to comply will result in penalties, including possible removal of the animal and fines. We trust you understand the seriousness of this matter. Willow Creek HOA Board. Jack reread the letter, a cold knot forming in his stomach. This wasn't just a request. It was an ultimatum. The words secure enclosure were vague, but he knew what it meant. The HOA wanted to cage Bucky in a cramped pen, an insult to the bison's freedom and dignity. And worse, Jack suspected this was just the beginning. As he looked out across his property, his eyes fixed on Bucky, lounging beneath an old oak tree, Jack felt a surge of protectiveness. His friend wasn't just an animal. Bucky was family. The thought of some faceless board stripping away that freedom ignited a fire inside him. That night, restless and uneasy, Jack wandered toward the community center, where the HOA held its meetings. From a distance, dim lights flickered through the tinted windows. Voices echoed faintly, sharp, hushed, conspiratorial. Jack's curiosity gnawed at him. He couldn't just sit back and wait. Creeping closer, he pressed an ear to the door crack. Through the murmur, he caught fragments of the conversation. Final plan. Must send a message. Can't let him get away with this. The tone was colder than he expected, almost ruthless. Someone spoke of removing the threat once and for all. Jack's pulse quickened. Was the HOA planning to take Bucky by force? His mind raced. This wasn't about safety or harmony. It was about power, control. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. As he slipped away into the dark, Jack's thoughts churned. The quiet suburban neighborhood he'd called home was about to become a battleground. The peaceful life he'd built was under siege, and Bucky was caught in the crossfire. Back at home, the bison stirred, lifting his massive head as if sensing the tension. Jack knelt beside him, voice low but firm. We're gonna face some storms, buddy, but I won't let them cage you. Not without a fight. Outside, the moon hung high, casting long shadows across the land. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked nervously. The calm was broken, and deep inside, Jack knew the real war was just beginning. The next morning, Jack awoke to a sharp knock at the door. His heart skipped a beat before he forced himself to move with steady calm. Opening the door, he found the HOA's president, Marlene Crane, standing there, clipboard in hand, eyes cold and unreadable. Jack, she said, voice clipped. We need to talk. It's urgent. Jack stepped aside reluctantly, letting her in. Marlene's heels clicked sharply on the wooden floor as she surveyed the cluttered living room, finally settling her gaze on a framed photo of Bucky. Standing proudly under the open sky, "I'm here to remind you the deadline is non-negotiable," she said, folding her arms. "By the end of the month, Bucky must be confined within a secure enclosure. The board expects full compliance." Jack narrowed his eyes. "You mean a cage? A tiny pen where he can't move freely? You want me to lock him up like a wild animal?" Marlene's lips twitched into a faint, disdainful smile. "We're not trying to be cruel, Jack. This is about community safety. Several neighbors have voiced concerns about Bucky roaming freely. It's a liability." Jack felt a surge of anger. "Liability? Bucky's never hurt anyone. You're scared of something you don't understand. And I won't let you cage him like some circus act." Marlene's expression hardened. "It's not about fear. It's about rules. And you signed the HOA agreement when you bought this property. You agreed to abide by community standards." Jack bristled. "I didn't agree to give up my freedom. Or Bucky's." Marlene sighed, tapping her pen on the clipboard. "Look, if you don't comply, the board will have no choice but to take action. That could mean fines, or even seizing the animal for public safety reasons. I'm giving you fair warning." The weight of her words sank in like a stone. Jack clenched his fists. The letter was no bluff. The HOA wasn't just making demands. They were threatening him. Marlene lingered a moment longer before turning to leave. "You have until the end of the month. After that, we move forward with enforcement. I hope you reconsider." As the door shut behind her, Jack felt the room close in. The deadline loomed like a guillotine. How could he build a proper enclosure for a bison that needed room to roam? And more importantly, why now? Why had the HOA suddenly turned so aggressive? His mind raced, returning to the cryptic whispers he'd overheard at the HOA meeting the night before. Final plan. Must send a message. It sounded less like a safety concern, and more like an intimidation tactic. But who was behind it? And what did they hope to gain? Jack decided to visit his neighbors, hoping to find some allies. But the reaction he received chilled him. Some cast wary glances, unwilling to speak openly. Others gave subtle nods, but avoided direct involvement. One elderly woman, Mrs. Carmichael, whispered, "The HOA's board isn't what it used to be. They've got new people in charge. People who want to change everything. You should be careful, Jack." Jack's gut told him Mrs. Carmichael was right. The HOA was no longer just a neighborhood committee. It was something darker, more calculating. The final plan hinted at a deeper agenda than just protecting the community. Later that evening, Jack wandered along the edge of his property. The fading light painted long shadows over the rough terrain. Bucky grazed quietly, oblivious to the looming threat. Jack knelt beside him, running his hand over the bison's thick fur. "I don't know what they're planning," Jack murmured, "but I promise you, I'm not giving up without a fight. Not now, not ever." Suddenly a faint noise caught his attention. A scraping sound near the fence line. Jack froze, scanning the dimming woods. The sound stopped abruptly. His heart pounded. Someone had been near his property. Was it the HOA, animal control, or someone else entirely? Jack grabbed his flashlight and crept toward the fence. There, scratched into the old wooden post, was a series of strange marks, almost like claw scratches, but deliberate, as if someone had left a warning. His breath caught. What did it mean? Was it a message from a neighbor, or a threat from the unknown? Jack stepped back, the flashlight trembling in his grip. The stakes had just gone higher. The game had changed, and Jack was ready to play. Jack's mind raced as he stared at the strange scratches on the fence post, the faint moonlight casting eerie shadows across the rough wood. Whoever left those marks wanted him to know something, or maybe to warn him. But what? And who? The next day, he decided to act. He couldn't wait for the HOA's deadline to suffocate him and Bucky's freedom. Jack needed allies, people who understood the quiet power behind those manicured lawns and sterile community meetings. He couldn't fight the HOA alone. He began with neighbors who had quietly admired his independence but had kept their distance. At first, they were hesitant, eyes darting nervously. The HOA had a way of making people scared to speak up, but when Jack shared what he'd overheard, the ominous late-night board meeting, the threats in Marlene's voice, the strange claw marks on his fence, something shifted. "Maybe it's time we stop pretending everything's fine," murmured Lisa, a young mother with a sharp mind and fierce loyalty. "If they think they can bully you into submission, they've got another thing coming." Soon a small circle formed. Lisa, Mr. Rivera, the retired vet who understood animal behavior, and Karen, a landscape artist who knew every inch of the neighborhood's green spaces. Together, they began brainstorming ways to protect Bucky and expose the HOA's true intentions. "We need to know what they're planning," Lisa said, her eyes flashing with determination. "If the HOA hires animal control, it won't just be about fences. It could get ugly. They might try to trap Bucky, sedate him, or worse." Mr. Rivera nodded grimly. "Bison are strong, but they don't like confinement. If they force him into a small pen, Bucky could panic. That could be dangerous for him and the neighborhood." Karen added, "I've seen strange trucks driving around late at night. Could be security or animal control scouts. They're mapping the area, planning the best spot to trap him." Jack felt the weight of their words settle on his shoulders. The HOA wasn't bluffing. They were mobilizing. That evening, Jack made a decision. He would not wait passively for the trap to snap shut. If the HOA was coming for Bucky, he'd be ready. Together, the group laid out a plan: create distractions, monitor suspicious activity, and fortify the parts of the land that couldn't be easily breached. Jack spent hours reinforcing weak fence lines with strong cables and hidden sensors. Lisa set up night vision cameras around the perimeter, while Karen mapped escape routes through the woods. Mr. Rivera trained Jack in reading Bison behavior. When Bucky was calm, when he was stressed, and most importantly, when he was ready to run. But despite their preparations, an unsettling feeling gnawed at Jack. The HOA's moves were deliberate and chillingly coordinated. The letter, the late-night meeting, the strange marks. It all pointed to something more than just neighborhood rules enforcement. Late one night, as Jack sat in his darkened living room, reviewing footage from the cameras, the faint hum of an engine caught his attention. Through the grainy black and white images, he saw a large truck creeping along the edge of his property, headlights off, moving with unnatural stealth, his breath hitched. This wasn't animal control. It was something else. Someone was watching, waiting. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside into the cold night. The wind whispered through the trees as Jack moved quietly toward the brush. The truck's engine suddenly sputtered and died. Then a shadow slipped out and disappeared. Into the darkness, Jack's pulse thundered in his ears. He wasn't just fighting a faceless bureaucracy anymore. This had become a covert war. The next morning, Lisa found Jack pacing nervously by the fence line. "You look like you saw a ghost." Jack shook his head. "No, something worse. They're spying on us." I think the HOA's hired more than just animal control. They've got enforcers. Lisa's eyes narrowed. We need to get ahead of them. If they think they can bully us, they're wrong. Bucky's freedom is on the line, and so is the truth. As the sun rose over the quiet neighborhood, the peaceful facade cracked, revealing the brewing storm beneath. Jack looked at Bucky, who grazed peacefully, unaware of the danger closing in. But Jack knew one thing for certain. When the trap was finally set, Bucky would fight like the wild spirit he was. And so would Jack. The morning dawned grey and heavy, the kind of sky that seemed to press down on everything beneath it. Jack woke before sunrise, a restless knot tightening in his chest. Today was the day the HOA's ultimatum came due. The day they would try to trap Bucky. He moved silently around the house, preparing for what felt like a battle rather than just another morning. Lisa was already at the fence, adjusting the night vision cameras one last time. Mr. Rivera had arrived early with sturdy ropes and calming herbs meant to soothe Bucky if things went wrong. Karen paced nervously near the tree line, watching for any sign of the approaching trap crew. "We have to stay sharp," Jack whispered, barely able to keep his voice steady. "If they think they can bully Bucky into that pen, they're in for a surprise." The HOA's animal control team arrived mid-morning, pulling up in white trucks, emblazoned with a generic wildlife management logo. Their leader was a tall man with a hard jaw and cold eyes that didn't hide his disdain for Jack and his bison. Behind them came crates, cages, and bait. Large piles of apples and hay meant to lure Bucky into the trap. Jack's stomach churned. He hated the cold efficiency with which these strangers moved through his land, marking the ground and snapping pictures. This wasn't about safety. It was about domination. As the crew began assembling a large metal pen near the east pasture, Jack crept closer, careful to keep Bucky calm. The bison grazed peacefully, sensing nothing yet, but Jack knew the moment was coming. The bait was set near the pen's opening, apples glinting red and juicy in the afternoon light. Jack's heart pounded as Bucky lifted his massive head and slowly ambled toward the tempting treats. Lisa kept the cameras rolling, capturing every tense moment. Mr. Rivera stood ready with his calming herbs, a rope in hand in case things escalated. Jack whispered, "Easy, boy. Just a taste." But then, just as Bucky reached the bait, a sudden sharp whistle cut through the air. The trapdoor slammed shut, a loud metallic clang that echoed through the quiet neighborhood. For a heartbeat, it seemed the bison might submit. But then Bucky's wild instincts erupted like a volcano. His powerful muscles coiled and tensed. With a guttural bellow that shook the ground, he charged. The metal bars rattled violently as Bucky slammed into the pen's side, bending steel with terrifying force. The crew scrambled, shouting orders and waving arms, but it was chaos. Security. Cameras toppled. Fences splintered, and Bucky's hooves struck the ground with thunderous power. Jack's heart raced, torn between fear for his friend's safety and awe at his sheer strength. "Come on, boy! Get out!" he shouted, moving toward the pen. With a final surge, Bucky smashed the weakened gate, sending shards of metal flying. The bison burst free into the open, wild and unstoppable. The crew retreated, some nursing bruises, others cursing under their breath. The pristine lawns of the HOA had turned into a battlefield, littered with broken signs, uprooted flowers, and shattered fences. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, eyes wide with shock and disbelief. What had been a quiet suburb was now the stage for an unleashed force of nature. Jack reached Bucky's side as the bison slowed, nostrils flaring and muscles trembling. "You did it, buddy! You broke their trap!" But the victory was bittersweet. The HOA's wrath was far from over. As Jack looked out over the wreckage, a sudden chill ran down his spine. Near the broken gate, scratched into the ground in fresh dirt, were the same strange marks he'd seen on the fence post days before. Deliberate, cryptic, a silent warning. What message was being sent, and who had left it? The sky darkened as clouds gathered, mirroring the storm brewing in Jack's heart. The trap had failed spectacularly, but the real war was just beginning. The morning after the Great Escape, Willow Creek Estates was buzzing with whispered rumors and sideways glances. The once perfect lawns and white fences bore scars of the previous day's chaos. Bent metal, uprooted flowers, and deep hoof prints marred the pristine neighborhood. Jack's property stood as the epicenter of the turmoil, but surprisingly, the damage extended beyond his land. Jack sat on his porch, a heavy weight pressing down on his chest. Bucky grazed peacefully nearby, calm now, but still alert, as if aware the fight wasn't over. Jack's eyes flicked toward the horizon, where a fleet of white trucks rolled into the neighborhood like an invading army. The HOA wasn't backing down. Marlene Crane, the cold-faced HOA president, led the charge, flanked by an aggressive legal team and contractors wielding measuring tapes and clipboards. Their expressions were thinly veiled with fury and determination. Jack stood up, muscles tense. He knew what this meant: retaliation. Marlene's voice cut through the morning air like a scalpel. "Mr. Harris, your property is now in violation of multiple HOA regulations, not only for harboring an unauthorized animal, but for the destruction of common property." Jack's jaw clenched. "Bucky didn't destroy anything that wasn't provoked. You set a trap and tried to cage him like some wild circus act. Intentions don't matter anymore," Marlene snapped. "The board has voted to impose heavy fines, and if these damages aren't repaired immediately, we will place liens on your property. You will also be required to remove the bison permanently." Jack's blood boiled. The threats were relentless, but he refused to bow. "You want to bully me into giving up Bucky? You'll have to go through me first." Behind the scenes, the HOA had begun mobilizing a campaign to turn the neighbors against Jack. Flyers appeared on doorsteps, warning of the dangerous bison roaming free. Anonymous calls were made to local news stations, painting Jack as a reckless danger to the community. Lisa and Karen worked feverishly to counteract the smear campaign, posting videos of Bucky's gentle nature, testimonials from neighbors who'd never seen him act aggressively, and evidence of the HOA's escalating harassment. Still, the tension was palpable. Jack's allies dwindled under pressure as some neighbors, fearing fines or backlash, distanced themselves. The once cozy community was fracturing, trust dissolving into suspicion. One evening, Jack received a chilling message slipped under his door. A photo of Bucky, taken from a hidden camera, with the words, "Next time we won't miss." The warning was clear. Jack's nights became restless, plagued by shadows and the fear of what might come next. Yet amid the mounting threats, a steely resolve grew stronger inside him. Bucky was more than a pet. He was a symbol of freedom and resistance against a force trying to erase everything Jack stood for. That weekend, Jack and his allies gathered in secret at his property. They laid plans to expose the HOA's intimidation tactics and protect Bucky at all costs. Mr. Rivera shared a startling insight. Bison don't forget. They sense danger and remember those who threaten them. If the HOA tries to trap Bucky again, it could provoke an even more violent reaction. Jack's gaze hardened. Then we'll be ready. We're not just fighting for Bucky. We're fighting for every person who's been silenced or bullied. As the sun set behind the trees, casting long shadows over the scarred neighborhood, Jack felt the quiet before another storm. The HOA's next move was coming, and it would be more dangerous than anything before. But Jack was prepared to stand his ground, no matter the cost. Days passed in a tense, uneasy silence, but Jack knew the calm was only a prelude to the next storm. The HOA's warnings were no empty threats. Every creak of a truck door, every unfamiliar face lingering near the neighborhood, set his nerves on edge. Late one evening, the stillness was shattered by the sharp crack of a spotlight sweeping across Jack's property. Blinding beams sliced through the darkness, catching Bucky mid-graze, his massive form frozen in startled alertness. Jack sprang from his porch, flashlight in hand, heart hammering. "Who's there? Show yourself." The light snapped off abruptly, replaced by a chorus of whispered voices and hurried footsteps. Retreating into the night, he rushed toward Bucky, who was trembling but unharmed. The bison's eyes were wide, reflecting a primal fear Jack had never seen before. "We're not safe anymore," Jack muttered, voice low and urgent. Lisa, who'd stayed overnight to help keep watch, joined him, her face pale but determined. "They're escalating. This isn't just about rules anymore. It's harassment, psychological warfare." The group gathered quickly, reinforcing defenses and sharing watch duties in shifts. Karen scouted the perimeter, marking blind spots where shadows could hide, while Mr. Rivera advised on keeping Bucky calm. Then came the first real assault. One night, as a thunderstorm rolled in, Jack was jolted awake by the sound of snapping, branches and distant shouts. He raced outside to see a convoy of dark vehicles barreling down the narrow lanes, headlights piercing the rain. The HOA's hired enforcers, not just animal control, but mercenaries clad in tactical gear, armed with nets, tranquilizer guns, and cages. Their mission was clear: capture Bucky by any means necessary. Jack's breath caught as he saw them flood the property, cutting off escape routes. The rain slicked the ground, turning the field into a muddy trap. "Bucky, move!" Jack shouted, panic tightening his chest. But Bucky was cornered, his usual calm replaced by frantic energy. He charged at the nearest net with terrifying force, the mesh shredding under his hooves. Chaos erupted. Nets flew, shots rang out, not bullets, but the harsh crack of tranquilizer darts. Bucky bellowed in rage and fear, dodging and weaving. Through the muddy battlefield, Lisa shouted commands, trying to distract the mercenaries, while Karen and Mr. Rivera worked desperately to calm the bison. Jack found himself face to face with the leader of the enforcers, a grim man named Simmons, whose cold eyes betrayed no mercy. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Harris," Simmons snarled. "Step aside. This ends tonight." Jack squared his shoulders. "I'm not giving up, Bucky." The standoff crackled with tension. Then, as if on cue, Bucky made a desperate explosive move, smashing through a fence post and breaking free into the nearby woods. The enforcers scrambled to regroup, but Jack and his allies knew the fight wasn't over. The neighborhood was no longer a quiet suburb. It had become a battleground. As thunder rolled overhead, Jack looked toward the woods where Bucky disappeared, heart pounding with a fierce mixture of fear and hope. He knew the HOA's siege had begun, and the war for Bucky's freedom was only just starting. Jack plunged into the dense forest, the rain soaking through his clothes and chilling him to the bone. Every step was a desperate race against time. Bucky was out there, somewhere in the shadows, wounded or scared, and the enforcers were closing in fast. The woods, once a place of quiet refuge, now felt claustrophobic and hostile. Twisting roots clawed at his boots, and branches whipped his face as he pushed deeper. His breath came in ragged gasps, but he refused to stop. Behind him, distant shouts and the thudding of heavy boots echoed. The enforcers were splitting up, trying to surround the forest, to flush out Bucky and him. Lisa and Karen were right behind, shouting encouragement and scanning the darkness with flashlights. Mr. Rivera's voice cracked over a walkie-talkie, coordinating their movements and warning of approaching vehicles. Jack's mind raced. They couldn't let the mercenaries capture Bucky alive. The Bison's spirit was untamed, caged. He'd be broken. This was their last chance. Suddenly, a sharp whistle cut through the rain. Jack froze, heart pounding, as Bucky's massive form burst through the trees ahead, wild eyes glowing in the dark. The Bison charged forward, but the enforcers closed the net around him like a tightening noose. Jack screamed, throwing himself between Bucky and the men, his arms outstretched. "No!" he shouted. "He's not yours." One of the mercenaries raised a dart gun, aiming for Bucky's neck. Jack lunged, knocking it aside, but another shot hissed past, embedding in the wet earth near his foot. Bucky panicked, thrashing violently, breaking through the netting. The ground shook beneath his hooves, mud flying as he bolted deeper into the forest. Jack followed, desperation pushing him onward. His legs burned, lungs burning with cold air. Then came the cracking sound, the unmistakable snap of a branch. Behind him, Jack spun just in time to see Simmons, the mercenary leader, aiming a tranquilizer rifle. "Stop this now, Harris," Simmons growled. "You're outnumbered, and this fight is over." Jack's grip tightened on a sturdy branch. Not while Bucky still runs free. Before Simmons could fire, a sharp howl echoed from the shadows. A pack of wild dogs, summoned by the neighborhood's stray population, surged from the underbrush. Chaos erupted as the dogs attacked the enforcers, scattering them into disarray. Jack seized the moment. "Go, Bucky!" he yelled. The Bison thundered away, disappearing into the deepest part of the forest. Jack watched him vanish, torn between relief and the crushing knowledge that the fight was far from over. Back at the edge of the woods, the remaining enforcers regrouped, shaken but undeterred. Simmons snarled, vowing revenge. The HOA's campaign was no longer just about rules. It was a battle for control, and they would stop at nothing. Jack returned home that night, drenched and exhausted, but filled with a fierce resolve. The neighborhood had seen the wild side of Willow Creek Estates, and the truth was out. Bucky was more than just a bison. He was a symbol of resistance against the suffocating grip of the HOA. Lisa, Karen, and Mr. Rivera gathered at Jack's porch, sharing grim looks but determined spirits. "We've won a battle," Lisa said quietly. "But the war's still ahead." Jack nodded. "They want to trap him, break him, but they don't understand. Bucky is freedom, and freedom fights back." As the night deepened, the flicker of hope burned stronger than ever, and with it, the promise of a final stand that would shake the very foundations of the community. The dawn broke with a cold, eerie silence, hanging over Willow Creek Estates. Jack sat on his porch, eyes scanning the horizon, where the forest met the neatly trimmed lawns. The battle with the HOA had raged for weeks, but now a strange quiet had settled. A deceptive calm before the final storm. Then came the first sign. The shattered remains of the HOA's security system, found ripped apart in the underbrush like paper. No one could explain it, but the message was clear. Bucky was striking back. That morning, the neighborhood woke to a startling sight. The HOA's new signs, the ones declaring strict bans and fines, were shredded, hanging in tatters from their posts. Mailboxes were overturned. The carefully landscaped flower beds in front of the HOA president's house were trampled and uprooted. The earth churned and muddy. Panic rippled through the community. Marlene Crane, furious and desperate, called an emergency meeting, but as she prepared to address the crowd, a loud guttural bellow echoed from the edge of the woods. The entire neighborhood froze. Out of the shadows lumbered Bucky, massive, majestic, and untamed, standing boldly in front of the gathered crowd, his eyes locked on Marlene's, fierce and unyielding. No one dared move. Then, without warning, Bucky charged, but instead of attacking the people, he ran straight at the HOA's headquarters, smashing through windows and tearing down the barricades the board had erected. Chaos erupted. Neighbors fled in shock and awe, watching as the wild force of nature dismantled the symbols of their oppression. The Bison's rampage was no mindless destruction. It was a powerful message. Jack stepped forward, raising his hands. This is what happens when you try to cage what belongs to the wild. Marlene's face twisted with rage and humiliation. She tried to call for order, but the damage was done. The HOA's authority had been shattered, quite literally, and the community was shaken to its core. The local news arrived quickly, capturing the spectacle live. The story went viral. A man, his bison, and a fight against a ruthless HOA. Tyranny. Behind the scenes, Jack's allies worked fast, rallying support from neighbors and legal experts to dismantle the HOA's harsh rules. Evidence of their illegal harassment was uncovered, forcing the board to resign under public pressure. The twist came weeks later, when Jack discovered a hidden camera on his property, left by the HOA's mercenaries during their siege. Reviewing the footage, he found something chilling. The strange marks he'd seen scratched in the dirt near the trap site weren't random. They were part of a secret plan. A coded message meant to summon hired mercenaries from outside their neighborhood, escalating the conflict to a violent level. Jack shared the evidence with the authorities, triggering an investigation that exposed corruption and abuse of power within the HOA. In the end, the neighborhood voted to dissolve the HOA entirely, returning control to the residents. Bucky was declared a community treasure, protected by new laws, ensuring his freedom. As Jack stood by the fence, watching Bucky roam freely under the open sky, he smiled. "We fought the system," he said softly, "and won. But this isn't just about one bison. It's about standing up for what's right, no matter the odds." The story of Bucky's rebellion became legend, a reminder that sometimes the wild refuses to be tamed, and that courage can come from the most unexpected places.